"Just get out!" my wife said, loud enough for every table at our daughter's engagement dinner to hear. Forks stopped moving. Glasses froze halfway to people's mouths. Even the waiter standing by the wall lowered his eyes like he had accidentally walked into a private funeral. For one long second, nobody breathed. Then every face in that polished dining room turned toward me. I was standing beside the family table with one hand still resting on the back of my chair, wearing the clean flannel jacket I had brushed twice before leaving the house. And somehow, I felt more exposed than if I had walked in wearing rags. Elaine smiled when she said it. That was the part I remember most. Not the words, not the silence after them. The smile. Small, controlled, almost polite.
I expect your
like she was correcting a waiter who had brought the wrong bottle of wine.
That might be difficult.
Difficult or
Raymond,
not,
she
it will be
added,
done.
softer now, but still loud enough for everyone to hear. Don't make this harder than it already is. My daughter Megan sat 3 chairs away from me in a cream-colored dress, her engagement ring catching the chandelier light every time her hands trembled. She did not look at me. She looked at the folded napkin in her lap. Her fiancé stared at his plate. His parents exchanged the kind of glance people use when they are deciding whether someone else's embarrassment is going to ruin their evening. Elaine slid my coat across the table toward me. Not handed it, not offered it, slid it. Like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room and needed to be removed before dessert.
We're
I
running out
reached
of
for it
options here,
slowly
James.
because I did not trust my hand not to shake.
There has to be another
That
way,
was
Arthur.
when, from table 6 near the far wall, an old man with scarred hands folded his napkin, placed it beside his untouched coffee, and stood up. I did not know yet why the restaurant manager suddenly stopped walking toward my wife and turned toward that table instead. I did not know why the old man was staring at me like he had been waiting 16 years to say my name. All I knew was that the room had gone silent for one reason, and it was about to stay silent for another. 3 hours before my wife told me to get out, I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror trying to smooth down the collar of the only jacket I owned that still looked decent under bright lights. It was dark blue flannel, heavier than it needed to be for spring, with one cuff worn thin from years of rubbing against truck doors, lunch pails, and steel handrails. Elaine had hated that jacket for a long time. She said it made me look like I had just come from a hardware store. Maybe she was right. But I had washed it the night before, hung it carefully over the shower rod, and brushed the shoulders with my palm until the fabric lay flat. It was not fancy, it was not expensive, but it was clean. And for most of my life, clean was how I showed respect. My name is Raymond Cole. I am 65 years old. I spent 38 years working pipeline jobs across 3 states, first as a helper, then as a welder, then as a foreman responsible for men who had wives, children, mortgages, bad knees, drinking problems, and reasons they needed to make it home alive. By the time I retired, my hands had more scars than smooth skin. My back complained every time I bent too fast, and my hearing was just bad enough that Elaine could mutter insults from the kitchen and pretend I had not heard them. I was not a soft man, but I was never a loud one. That confused people. They thought quiet meant weak. They thought a man who did not defend himself in every room had nothing worth defending. Elaine had started believing that before I noticed. Or maybe I noticed and chose not to fight it because marriage teaches some people how to love and teaches others how much silence they can survive. That evening was supposed to be for Megan, our only daughter. Our girl who used to run across the yard with her hair coming loose from both braids, shouting for me to lift her high enough to touch the lowest branch of the maple tree. Our girl who once cried because I left before sunrise for a 3-week job and made me promise I would bring back a rock from every town I worked in. I still had those rocks in a coffee can in the garage, each one labeled in black marker with the name of a place Megan had never seen, but knew because her father had missed bedtime there. She was 29 now, engaged to a young man named Preston Whitmore, whose family owned 3 medical supply companies and spoke about restaurants the way my old crews spoke about weather, with confidence, judgment, and the belief that getting it wrong could ruin everything. Megan loved him. I believed that. He was polite to me in the careful way educated people are polite when they do not know what to do with a man who can fix a water heater but not pronounce the name of the wine they brought to Christmas. I never held that against him. A man cannot help the house he was raised in, any more than a tree can help the hill where it takes root. But Elaine had changed after Megan started dating Preston. Not all at once. That would have been easier to name. She changed in little ways. She corrected my grammar in front of people. She bought new dishes and threw away the chipped mugs I liked. She stopped calling our porch the porch and started calling it the front sitting area, after Preston's mother visited once and said the house had charm. She told me not to wear my work boots to family gatherings, even if they were clean. She said my stories ran too long. Then she said my stories were depressing. Then she said maybe I should let other people talk for a change, though I had never been the one filling rooms with my voice. On the afternoon of the engagement dinner, Elaine came into the bedroom while I was buttoning my shirt. She was wearing a silver dress I had never seen before, and earrings I knew better than to ask the price of. She looked beautiful. I can say that honestly. Some people think pain cancels truth, but it does not. Elaine was still beautiful in that sharp, polished way she had worked years to build. Her hair was swept back, her lipstick was perfect. Her eyes moved over me from shoes to collar, and I watched her expression tighten before she said a word. "You're wearing that?" she asked. I looked down at myself. Gray slacks, white shirt, flannel jacket, brown shoes I had polished at the kitchen table with an old rag. "It's clean," I said. "That wasn't what I asked." I touched the front of the jacket. "It's Megan's night. I thought she'd like me looking like myself." Elaine let out a small laugh, not loud enough to be called cruel by anyone standing outside the room, but sharp enough to leave a mark. "Raymond, tonight is not about making a statement." I wasn't making one. "You never think you are." She walked to the dresser and picked up my watch, the old one Megan had bought me with her first paycheck from the bookstore when she was 16. The leather band was cracked, but I still wore it for important days. Elaine held it between 2 fingers like it was something pulled from a drain. "Do you have the other watch?" "This is the one Megan gave me." "It looks old." "It is old." "Exactly." I looked at her in the mirror. "Elaine." "What?" "I'm her father." For a moment, something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Irritation at being asked to remember something she found inconvenient. "Nobody said you weren't." "Then why does it feel like you're trying to dress me up as someone else?" She set the watch down harder than necessary. "Because Preston's parents will be there. His aunt will be there. Their friends will be there. These people are not used to—" She stopped. That was one of Elaine's habits. She never finished the sentence when the finished sentence would reveal too much. "Not used to what?" I asked. "Don't start." "I'm asking." "They're not used to people who talk about busted pipes and union disputes at dinner." I almost smiled, because I could not remember the last time anyone had asked me about either. I wasn't planning to give a lecture on pipe welding between courses. You joke, but you don't understand how these things work. Maybe I don't. I picked up the watch and buckled it around my wrist. But I understand showing up for my daughter. Elaine stared at me for a long moment. Then she reached over and straightened my collar with quick, impatient fingers. It was the closest thing to tenderness she had given me that day, and even that felt like correction. "Just be quiet tonight," she said. "Let me handle things. Smile when you need to. Don't bring up work. Don't make jokes Preston's family won't understand. And please, Raymond, please don't tell that story about the man who fell in the trench." I looked at her hand still resting near my collar. That man lived. That's not the point. It was always the point to him. Her hand dropped. This is what I mean. She walked out before I could answer. I stood there listening to her heels move down the hall, then looked at myself again. For a second, I saw what she saw. An old man in a flannel jacket, shoulders slightly rounded, hair thinner than it used to be, hands too rough for white tablecloths. Then I looked at the watch on my wrist and saw what Megan once saw. A father worth spending her first paycheck on. That was enough to get me out the door. Megan called while I was sitting in the passenger seat of Elaine's car. Elaine liked driving when we went somewhere important because she said my truck smelled like motor oil no matter how many times I cleaned it. I answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart." "Hi, Dad." Her voice was bright, but too bright, the way people sound when they are standing near someone they do not want to upset. "You on your way?" "No, your mother's driving like we're late for a court date, so yes." There was a small pause. Then Megan laughed, but it did not loosen anything in her voice. "Good. Preston's parents are already there." Elaine glanced at me. "Tell her we'll be there in 9 minutes." "Your mother says 9 minutes," I said. "Great. Dad?" "Yeah?" "Tonight might be a little formal." I looked out the window at the road sliding past. The same road I had driven 1,000 times, coming home tired and dirty while Megan slept in the back seat after school events I had barely made it to. I figured. So maybe just let Mom handle the seating and the timing and everything? I heard Elaine's words inside Megan's mouth, and that hurt more than if Elaine had said them herself. "All right." "I don't mean it like that." "Like what?" Another pause. "I just want everything to go smoothly." "So do I. Preston's mom can be kind of particular." "Most mothers are particular about something." "Dad," her voice lowered, "please don't be upset." That was Megan, always asking me not to be upset before anyone had admitted they were hurting me. When she was little, she used to bring me bent nails from the garage floor and ask if they could still be useful. I always told her yes. I would tap them straight with a hammer and let her drop them into a jar. Maybe that was where I went wrong. Maybe I taught her too well that bent things could keep serving without complaint. "I'm not upset," I said. "Tonight is your night." Her breath softened. "Thank you." "You happy?" I asked. This time the pause was different, real. "I think so." "You think so?" "I am. I'm just nervous." "That's allowed." "You'll like the restaurant. It's beautiful." "I'm sure it is." "And Dad?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're coming." I held on to that sentence longer than I should have, maybe because some part of me already knew I would need it later. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. After she hung up, Elaine kept her eyes on the road. "You didn't need to make that joke about my driving." "It was just Megan." That is exactly when it matters. I turned my head toward the window again. All right. And don't ask her if she's happy in that tone. What tone? Like you're questioning the marriage. I'm her father. I'm allowed to ask if she's happy. Not tonight. I said nothing. The car moved through the nicer side of town, past homes with stone mailboxes and lawns so green they looked almost artificial. Elaine relaxed the closer we got, as if each expensive-looking house proved we were moving toward the kind of life she believed Megan deserved and away from the one I represented. I tried to remember the last time Elaine had been proud to sit beside me. There had been a company picnic years ago, back when Megan was 12, when one of my men came over with his wife and baby and told Elaine I had saved his job after he missed 2 shifts because his mother was dying. Elaine had smiled then. She had touched my arm and looked at me with something like surprise. Not love, maybe, but recognition, as if she had forgotten there were rooms where my name carried weight. I wondered when that stopped mattering to her. I wondered if it ever had. The restaurant was called Maribel's, though there was nothing simple enough about it to belong to a woman named Maribel. The sign was small and gold. The front windows were tall. Inside, warm light spilled over white tablecloths, dark wood and flowers arranged so carefully they looked afraid to wilt. A young hostess greeted Elaine by name. That told me Elaine had called more than once. "Mrs. Cole, everything is ready," the hostess said. Elaine smiled the smile she saved for people she wanted to impress. "Wonderful." Then she turned slightly toward me. Not enough to include me, just enough to check whether I was standing too close. I stepped back. Old habits. Megan saw us from across the room and came quickly, her dress moving around her knees like pale water. For a moment, I saw the little girl with loose braids again. Then she was in front of me, perfume and nerves and diamonds, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Hi, Dad." I hugged her carefully, afraid to wrinkle anything. "Look at you," I said. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." Her eyes shone, and for one second I thought she might cry. Then Elaine said, "Careful, sweetheart, your makeup." And Megan let go. Preston came next, tall, clean-shaven, handsome in a navy suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He shook my hand with both of his. "Mr. Cole, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it." His grip was firm but brief. He turned to Elaine with more ease. "Mrs. Cole, my parents are excited to see you again." "And I them," Elaine said, already moving. That was how the evening began. Everyone moving, me following. The private dining area was at the back, separated by a half wall and 2 large planters. There were 8 round tables, each with a small printed number in a brass holder. The family table sat near the center, larger than the others, with flowers, candles, and place cards written in looping black ink. I found Megan's name first. Preston beside her. Elaine beside Megan. Preston's parents across from them. His aunt, his uncle, a family friend. I looked for mine. Raymond Cole was not there. For a moment I thought I had missed it. My eyesight was not what it used to be in dim light, so I leaned closer. Elaine's hand touched my elbow. "You're over here." She guided me to a chair at the same table, technically, but set at the far curve, half a place beyond the natural circle, where a person could sit and still feel like an extra leaf added after the table was already full. My place card was there, angled slightly away from the others. Raymond. Not Dad, not father of the bride-to-be, just Raymond. The table was crowded. Elaine said before I asked. "This gives everyone more room." "Sure." I sat down. The chair legs whispered across the floor as I pulled myself in. Megan looked at the arrangement, then at her mother. Something flickered in her face. She saw it. I know she saw it. But Preston's mother called her name just then, and Megan turned away. I placed my hands in my lap. They looked wrong against the white tablecloth. Too large, too scarred. The knuckles thick from old breaks I never got set properly because missing work cost money. I folded them together under the table where nobody had to notice. That was when I first felt someone watching me. Not Elaine, not Megan. From across the room, near the far wall, Table 6 sat under a framed black and white photograph of the town from 50 years ago. The men at that table were older than most of the guests, dressed in suits that did not quite hide the shape of working lives. One had a cane hooked over the back of his chair. Another had shoulders like a man who had carried weight long after he should have stopped. And one man, broad-faced, white-haired, with a scar running from his thumb to his wrist, was looking directly at me. Not glancing, looking. I turned away first out of politeness, then looked back because something about him tugged at an old part of my memory. Pipeline men change with age in strange ways. A young man, you remember, laughing under a hard hat, can become a grandfather with silver eyebrows and still carry the same set of his jaw. I searched his face for a name and found nothing solid. Maybe Kansas. Maybe the winter job outside Tulsa. Maybe one of the crews from the river crossing that nearly killed 3 men when the bank gave way. The old man's eyes narrowed like he was doing the same math. Elaine leaned toward me. "Raymond?" I turned back. "What?" "Don't stare at people." I thought I knew him. "You think you know everyone with rough hands." I let that pass. "Maybe I do." "Please don't start wandering around shaking hands. This isn't a reunion hall." I looked once more toward Table 6. The old man had lowered his gaze to his napkin, but his hand was still. Too still. Beside him, another man said something close to his ear. The old man did not answer. He kept staring at the table like he had just seen a ghost walk in wearing a flannel jacket. I should have gone over then. I know that now. I should have stood, crossed that polished floor, and asked him his name before the room had a chance to turn cruel. But Megan was laughing nervously at something Preston's mother said. Elaine was watching me like a guard watching a gate. And I had spent a lifetime believing peace was something a man could buy with his own silence. So I stayed seated. I smoothed my jacket under the table. I touched the old watch on my wrist. I told myself that if I could get through one dinner without embarrassing anyone, then Megan would remember that I came, that I smiled, that I loved her enough not to make the night about me. I did not yet understand that everyone else had already made the night about what they thought I was. And before dessert came, they were going to say it out loud. Dinner began with the kind of laughter that sounds expensive before it sounds happy. Preston's father, Charles Whitmore, told a story about missing a flight in Zurich, and everyone at the family table laughed in the right places, even when the story did not seem to have a point beyond reminding us that he had been to Zurich. His wife, Patricia, smiled with her mouth closed and kept one hand lightly over Megan's, as if she had already started practicing ownership. Elaine laughed louder than anyone. Not too loud, never uncontrolled, but with a brightness that made her sound younger than she was. She leaned forward when Patricia spoke. She nodded when Charles mentioned their friends. She asked questions about people she had never met and acted as if their answers mattered deeply to her. I watched her perform and realized she had been rehearsing this version of herself for months, maybe years. Maybe our whole marriage had been one long audition for a room like this, and I had simply been too tired to notice I was the part she planned to cut. A waiter poured water into my glass. I thanked him. Patricia glanced at my hands when I reached for it. Not rudely, exactly, just quickly enough that I saw it. I moved my hands back under the table. Preston raised his glass and thanked everyone for coming. Megan looked beautiful beside him, but she kept touching the edge of her napkin, folding and unfolding it with her thumb. I knew that habit. She had done the same thing at 6 years old before her first school play. She had done it at 17 before telling us she had dented Elaine's car. She was nervous, and I wanted to reach across the table and still her hand the way I used to, but there were flowers and candles and people between us now. So I smiled at her instead. She saw me for half a second and smiled back. It was small. It was real. Then Elaine touched Megan's shoulder, turned her toward Patricia, and the moment was gone. The first course came on white plates with sauce arranged in thin lines, like someone had painted the food instead of cooked it. I did not know what half of it was, but I ate carefully and said nothing. That was what Elaine had asked of me. Smile when needed. Do not bring up work. Do not tell old stories. Do not be too much yourself. Across the room, table 6 remained quiet. The old man with the scarred hand had not stopped looking in our direction. Every time I felt his eyes, a memory tried to rise and failed. A flooded ditch, a yellow hard hat, a young man yelling over engine noise. I could not place him. Maybe that was age. Maybe that was shame. Men from those years had passed through my life by the hundreds, and I had tried to carry all of them safely. But no man can keep every face where time cannot reach it. Still, there was something in the way he watched me that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition waiting for permission. Charles asked Preston about a new position at the company, and Preston answered smoothly. He talked about expansion, partnerships, distribution channels, words that moved around the table without needing dirt under them. Elaine listened like each sentence was another brick in the house she wanted Megan to live inside. Then Charles turned toward me with the polite smile of a man remembering there was another person at the table. "And Raymond," he said, "Elaine mentioned you're retired now." "That's right." "What line of work were you in?" Elaine's fork paused before it reached her mouth. "Pipeline," I said. "Mostly natural gas, some water infrastructure later on." "Ah," Charles said, drawing the sound out just long enough to make it empty. "Physical work?" "Some of it." "Must be nice to be done with all that." I could have told him there were men who never got to be done with it because a trench collapsed, or a valve failed, or somebody in an office decided safety was too expensive that quarter. I could have told him retirement was not a vacation when your body still woke at 4:30 every morning looking for a job it no longer had. But Elaine's eyes were on me, warning me from across the candlelight. So I said, "It has its quiet moments." Patricia smiled. "Do you keep busy?" Before I could answer, Elaine said, "Raymond has little projects around the house." Little projects. The porch steps I rebuilt so her mother would not fall. The water heater I replaced when the company wanted $1,100 just to install one. The garage shelves I made from scrap lumber because Elaine said the house looked cluttered. Little projects. "That's good," Patricia said. Men need something to do after retirement. She said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. I nodded and reached for my water. Megan looked at me again. Her mouth opened as if she might say something. Maybe that I had run crews. Maybe that I had trained men. Maybe that I had worked through ice storms and heat waves so she could have braces and books and a bedroom painted yellow because she asked for sunlight on the walls. But Elaine placed a hand on Megan's wrist and asked Patricia about the floral arrangements. Megan closed her mouth. I took a drink of water and let the cold sit behind my teeth until the feeling in my chest passed. By the second course, the table had learned how to speak around me. Conversation moved from Preston's work to the wedding venue, from wedding venue to guest lists, from guest lists to the difficulty of keeping events tasteful without making them feel stiff. Elaine shone during that part. She had opinions about linens, music, photography, lighting, even though when Megan was little, Elaine and I had celebrated birthdays with grocery store sheet cake and balloons tied to kitchen chairs. A wedding is about atmosphere, Elaine said. People remember how a room feels. Patricia nodded. Exactly. Details tell people who you are. I looked down at my plate. Details tell people who you are. My detail was a flannel jacket. My detail was a watch with a cracked leather band. My detail was hands I had not been able to scrub clean of labor even after 2 years retired. Elaine must have felt me retreating because she grew more confident. Megan has always had good taste, she said, even as a little girl. She used to like collecting rocks, I said before I could stop myself. It came out gently, almost to Megan more than the table. Every time I came back from a job, she wanted one from wherever I'd been. Megan's face softened. I remember that. You labeled them, I said. All those towns. For one breath, my daughter was mine again, not Preston's fiancé, not Elaine's project, mine. The little girl kneeling on the garage floor with a marker in her hand, asking whether Oklahoma had more red rocks than Missouri. Then Elaine laughed. Oh, Raymond, nobody wants to hear about rocks. The table chuckled because Elaine made it sound harmless. Megan's smile faded. It was sweet, she said, but quietly. Too quietly to rescue the moment. Patricia turned to her. You were an outdoorsy child? Elaine answered for her. Briefly. Thankfully, she grew out of the muddy phase. Another laugh. I put my fork down. At table 6, the scarred-handed man lifted his head. I saw his jaw tighten. This time the memory came closer. Mud. Rain. A young worker with a wife 8 months pregnant. A man whose hand had been sliced open on torn metal and who refused to leave the site because he needed the overtime. I looked at him again, and he did not look away. A little later, the first real mistake happened, though calling it a mistake gives too much mercy to the people who let it stand. Preston's aunt, a woman named Vivian with silver hair and a voice like a polished spoon, arrived late with her husband. Elaine rose to greet her. Patricia introduced people quickly as they rearranged chairs and made room. Vivian kissed Megan on both cheeks, hugged Preston, complimented Elaine's dress, then turned toward me with a pleasant, distracted smile. "And you are with the restaurant?" she asked. Nobody moved, not at first. It was such a small sentence, and yet the whole table seemed to understand at once that something had cracked open. I looked down at my jacket, then back at her. "No, ma'am." Vivian blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I saw you standing near the service station when we came in, and I thought, "This is Raymond," Elaine said quickly. "Megan's father." Not my husband. Megan's father. Even then she said it like an explanation for an inconvenience. Vivian placed a hand over her necklace. "Oh, my apologies." "No harm," I said. "I meant it, or tried to. People make mistakes. They see what they have been taught to see." But Elaine's face had gone tight, not because I had been insulted, but because the insult had exposed what she feared other people might notice. Preston looked uncomfortable. Charles studied his wine. Patricia gave a small, sympathetic smile that did not require her to do anything. Megan's eyes filled, but she blinked it away. I waited for her to say, "That's my dad." I waited for her to laugh and tell Vivian I built her first bookshelf, taught her to ride a bike, sat through every fever, paid every school bill, carried every suitcase into every dorm room. She said nothing. The silence did not last long, but it settled deep. Elaine touched my sleeve under the table, hard enough that her fingernails pressed through the fabric. "Please," she whispered without moving her lips, "do not make a scene." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. I wasn't planning to. "Good." She withdrew her hand and smiled at Vivian. "You must try the salmon. It's excellent here." Just like that, the table moved on, but I stayed where the mistake had left me. Half father, half staff. Fully unwanted. When the main course plates were cleared, Preston stood to thank both families again. He spoke well, I will give him that. He talked about how lucky he was to love Megan, how grateful he was that both families could come together, how marriage was not just two people, but two histories joining. Two histories. I looked at Megan when he said that. She looked down. Maybe she knew mine was being edited out right there in front of her. Maybe she did not know how to stop it. Preston's father spoke next, then Patricia, then Elaine. Elaine's toast was graceful. She talked about Megan's kindness, her discipline, her future. She talked about how proud she was to welcome Preston's family into ours, though the way she said it made it sound like we were the ones being welcomed upward. She even cried at the end, one perfect tear pressed away with one perfect finger. Everyone clapped. Megan stood and hugged her. I clapped too, because I loved them both, even then. Then, while the room was still warm from Elaine's speech, I placed my napkin beside my plate and pushed my chair back just enough to stand. "I'd like to say something," I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Megan looked up quickly. Hope crossed her face, then fear. Elaine turned toward me so slowly that I felt the temperature at the table change. "Raymond," she said, smiling for the others, "we're actually keeping the program short." "It'll be short. Dessert is coming." "Then before dessert." Preston shifted beside Megan. "I think it's okay," he said, trying to help, though he sounded uncertain. Elaine's smile hardened. "It's been a long evening. Raymond understands." I remained half standing, one hand on the table. I had not prepared much, just a few sentences. I wanted to tell Megan that when she was born, I was on a job 2 counties away and drove through a storm so hard I had to pull over twice because I could not see the road. I wanted to say that the first time I held her, her whole hand closed around my little finger, and I understood there were promises a man makes before he knows the words for them. I wanted to say that Preston should love her gently when she pretended not to be scared, because Megan's courage had always been quiet and needed room to breathe. That was all. Not a work story, Not a lecture, not an embarrassment. Just a father trying to bless his daughter in a room that had already decided he did not know how. "Elaine," I said softly, "I'm only going to say a few words." Her eyes flashed. "Sit down." The table went still again, but this time in a different way. People sensed the argument underneath the manners. Megan whispered, "Mom." Elaine did not look at her. "Raymond, not now." I looked at my daughter. "Megan, would you mind if I—" "Dad," she said, and the word broke halfway through. "Maybe later?" Later. That small mercy people offer when they are too afraid to give justice now. I nodded once. Of course. I sat back down. My knee bumped the underside of the table, making the silverware tremble. Elaine laughed lightly for the guests. "He gets sentimental," she said. "Fathers." Charles smiled in relief. Patricia reached for her glass. Conversation restarted in pieces. But over at table 6, the old man with the scarred hand had stopped pretending not to listen. His napkin lay untouched beside his plate. His eyes were on me, and there was anger in them now. Not wild anger, old anger. The kind that is waded through many years of men being underestimated. Dessert arrived on narrow plates dusted with powdered sugar. I remember that because Elaine later claimed everything happened before dessert, as if timing could make cruelty less complete. The waiter placed a plate in front of me, then hesitated because Elaine had leaned across the table toward my chair. Her smile was gone now, at least the part meant for me. "Raymond," she whispered. "Come with me for a moment." "Why?" "Just come. If you need to say something, say it here." Her eyes flicked toward Patricia, then Vivian, then Megan. "Do not do this." "Do what?" "Punish me because you feel insecure." I stared at her. For a moment, I truly did not understand the sentence. I had spent the evening shrinking myself smaller and smaller, giving up one piece of space after another until there was almost nothing left. And still, somehow, in Elaine's mind, I was the one taking too much. "I wanted to toast our daughter," I said. "You wanted attention." "No." "Yes, Raymond. You always do this. You sit there quietly, making everyone feel sorry for you, and then you wait for the right moment to make people feel guilty." Megan whispered, "Mom, please." Elaine turned on her, still smiling enough that from another table it might have looked like ordinary conversation. "Sweetheart, your father knows exactly what he's doing." I felt something inside me go very still. Not angry. Not yet. Just still. The way a job site goes still right before something heavy gives way. "What am I doing?" I asked. Elaine's voice dropped lower. "You are embarrassing me." There it was. Not us, not Megan, me. I looked around the table. Nobody knew where to put their eyes. Vivian suddenly became interested in her dessert fork. Charles looked toward the bar. Patricia's mouth tightened in discomfort. Preston stared at Megan, waiting for her to decide which pain mattered more. Megan looked at me. Finally, she looked at me, but she did not speak. Elaine reached down beside her chair and picked up my coat. I had not noticed she had taken it from the back of mine. She folded it once, badly, carelessly, and laid it across the edge of the table. "Maybe you should go home," she said. I heard a chair shift at table 6. I did not look. Not yet. "This is Megan's dinner," I said. "Exactly." "I'm her father." "Then act like it." The words hit harder than I expected. I could take being called old. I could take being mistaken for staff. I could take Elaine's little corrections, Patricia's soft pity, Charles's empty politeness. But act like her father, as if fatherhood were a costume I had failed to wear properly. As if the years I had traded my body for Megan's safety did not count, because I could not match the tablecloth. I put both hands on the table and pushed myself up slowly. My chair scraped behind me. I have acted like her father every day of her life, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. Even the days nobody here saw it. For the first time all night, the table had no polite way to cover the silence. Elaine's face changed. She had expected surrender, not a sentence. That was when she made her mistake. She forgot the room was listening. Or maybe she remembered and wanted them to. Her hand moved to my coat, and with 2 fingers she slid it across the white tablecloth until it stopped in front of me. "Just get out," she said. The words did not explode. They cut, clean and public. A fork stopped against a plate somewhere behind me. Someone inhaled sharply. The waiter, who had been approaching with coffee, froze near the wall. Megan's face went pale. Preston said, "Mrs. Cole," but softly, too softly to matter. Elaine lifted her chin, committed now. "You heard me. If you cannot behave with dignity, then leave before you ruin what is left of the evening." Dignity. I looked at the coat in front of me. The sleeve had fallen open, showing the worn cuff I had tried so hard to brush smooth. Elaine had placed it there like evidence, proof that I did not belong. Around us, the other tables had gone quiet in widening circles. Not everyone knew what had happened, but everyone knew something had. That is how public shame travels. It does not need details at first. It moves through posture, through halted hands, through the sudden absence of ordinary sound. I reached for the coat, slowly, carefully. I had spent my life teaching younger men not to panic when the ground shifted under them. Panic kills. Humiliation does not. Though in that moment I understood why some men never recover from it. My fingers closed around the fabric. I thought of leaving, not because Elaine was right, not because I believed I had ruined anything, because Megan was crying without making a sound, and some old fatherly instinct still wanted to protect her from the scene, even when the scene was me being erased. I lifted the coat from the table. No one defended me. That was the part that settled deepest, not Elaine's cruelty. Her cruelty had been growing for years. It was the quiet agreement of everyone else, the way good people become furniture when courage is required. Megan's lips parted. I waited one last time. One word from her would have kept me there. One word would have changed the whole night. But she pressed her napkin to her mouth and looked down. I nodded, though I do not know who I was nodding to. Maybe to the truth. Maybe to the end of something. "All right," I said. I turned away from the family table with my coat over my arm. I had taken one step when a chair scraped across the floor near the far wall. It was not loud, but in that silence it sounded like a door being forced open. I stopped. So did everyone else. At table 6, the old man with the scarred hand was standing. He was taller than I expected, though age had bent him a little through the shoulders. His white hair was combed back. His suit jacket pulled tight across a chest that had once been broader. One hand rested on the table, fingers spread, and I saw the scar again, a pale rope from thumb to wrist. something in my memory finally sparked. Rainwater, torn sheet metal, a young man cursing because blood was filling his glove. "Ray Cole," the old man said. His voice was rough, but it carried to every corner of the private room. I turned fully toward him. My mouth opened, but no name came. He smiled then, not happily, not gently, but with the grief of a man recognizing how much time had passed. "You don't remember me, do you?" I stared at his face, searching through younger versions of older features. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know I should." He stepped away from table 6. The other men seated there watched him with the respect of people who knew better than to interrupt. Elaine let out a brittle laugh. "Sir, I'm sorry if we disturbed your dinner. This is a private family matter." The old man did not look at her, not once. His eyes stayed on me. "Frank Delaney," he said. The name hit me like cold air. "Frankie?" His smile deepened. "Haven't been Frankie in a long time." The room shifted. I heard whispers starting and stopping. Elaine's face tightened with annoyance because the scene was no longer obeying her. Frank Delaney took another step toward me. 16 years, he said. I worked under this man for 16 years. He turned then, finally, not just to Elaine but to the whole room. "And I don't know what kind of dinner this is, but I know one thing. If Raymond Cole is standing here with his coat in his hand because somebody told him he has no dignity, then every person in this room ought to be ashamed of sitting down." No one spoke. The manager, who had been moving toward our table during Elaine's outburst, stopped in the aisle. His eyes went from Frank to me, then back to Frank again. Something like recognition crossed his face, too. Frank lifted his scarred hand slightly, the old wound catching the chandelier light. "Ray," he said, softer now, "you remember the river crossing outside Tulsa?" And just like that, I remembered everything. The rain, the collapsing bank, the boy with a baby on the way, the night I thought I had lost him. My coat slipped lower over my arm. Elaine whispered my name, sharp and warning, but for the first time that evening I did not turn toward her voice. Frank Delaney had stood up from table 6, and the room that had been so ready to watch me disappear was about to learn why he still knew my name. For a moment, after Frank Delaney said the words, "River crossing outside Tulsa," the restaurant disappeared, and I was no longer 65 years old with my coat hanging over one arm in a room full of people who had just watched my wife tell me to leave. I was 49 again, standing ankle-deep in brown water under a sky so dark it looked bruised. Rain hammered the hard hats of 12 men who were trying to finish a pipeline crossing before the bank gave out completely. The mud kept sliding, the radios kept cutting in and out. Every smart part of me had known we should shut it down, but the company man on site had been pushing, because delay penalties cost more than men, at least on paper. Frank had been younger then, strong as a fence post, stubborn as a mule, with a wife pregnant at home and overtime written all over his face. I remembered him now, not as the old man in the suit, but as Frankie Delaney in a yellow rain jacket, laughing through bad weather because he thought fear was something men were supposed to hide. Then the bank tore loose. Not all of it, just enough. Enough mud and sheet metal and equipment shifted at once that the whole site made a sound I had heard only a few times in my life. The deep, wrong groan of weight going where it was never meant to go. Frank had been nearest the trench, I remembered shouting his name. I remembered running when everyone else froze. I remembered grabbing him by the back of his jacket, just as his boot slid out from under him. I remembered the blood on his glove after torn metal opened his hand from thumb to wrist. And I remembered what came after, too. The report. The company man trying to make it sound like Frank had ignored procedure. The quiet meeting where I told them if they wanted to blame someone, they could blame the foreman, who had already called for shutdown twice and been told to keep moving. Me. I took the mark on my record because Frank had a child coming, and 3 missed paychecks would have buried him. I had not thought of it as heroism. It was just the job. You brought your men home, that was the rule. Standing there in Maribel's, with my wife's words still hanging in the air, I looked at Frank's scarred hand and finally said, "You nearly lost that hand." Frank smiled, but his eyes were wet. "You nearly lost your job saving it." The room stayed silent. Not polite silent now, listening silent. The kind of silence that leans forward because it has realized it does not know the story it thought it was watching. Elaine's face had gone pale around the mouth. "Raymond," she said, low and tight. "This is not necessary." Frank turned toward her then, slowly. "Ma'am, with respect, you made it necessary when you slid that man's coat across the table like he was trash." A few people looked down. Vivian, the woman who had mistaken me for someone with the restaurant, pressed her fingers to her necklace and stared at the floor. Preston's father, Charles, shifted in his chair, his earlier confidence gone soft at the edges. Patricia's hand moved away from Megan's. Megan was looking at me now, fully looking, as if some curtain had been ripped down and she could not decide whether to be grateful or ashamed of what she saw behind it. Frank came closer, each step careful but firm. The other men at table 6 did not stand yet, but their eyes followed him with a kind of old loyalty I had not felt in years. 16 years, Frank said again, this time to the whole room. "I worked under Ray Cole for 16 years. Pipeline, water mains, emergency repairs, and weather most people wouldn't drive through. I saw men quit under easier bosses. I saw men stay alive under him." Elaine gave another little laugh, but it broke in the middle. "That's very touching, sir, but this is my daughter's engagement dinner." "No," Frank said. "It's his daughter's engagement dinner, too." No one moved. The sentence landed clean. It did not shout. It did not need to. Frank looked at Megan, not cruelly, not accusing her the way Elaine deserved to be accused, just directly enough that my daughter's chin trembled. "And if this is the same little girl he used to talk about on every job, then I think she ought to know what kind of man her father was when nobody in a nice restaurant was watching." Megan's lips parted. "He talked about me?" Frank's face softened. "Every week." She looked at me, and I could see the child inside the woman for the first time that night. The child who had waited for rocks from towns she had never visited. The child who believed my lunchbox smelled like sawdust and coffee and safety. "He kept a picture of you taped inside his locker," Frank said. "Yellow dress. Missing front tooth. Big grin." Megan covered her mouth. I remembered that picture. School picnic, 2nd grade, her hair tangled from running. I had taped it inside a metal gang box after she gave it to me, and wrote in crooked letters, "Come home soon, Dad." It had stayed there until the edges curled from heat. "You were 7, I said quietly. You told me the picture would remind me where to drive back to. Her eyes filled. Elaine's chair scraped faintly as she shifted, uncomfortable now that memory had entered the room. Memory is dangerous to people who build their power by editing the past. The manager had been standing in the aisle since Frank rose from table 6. He was a man in his early 50s with dark hair, a black suit, and the trained calm of someone used to handling complaints before they spread. But he was no longer looking at the room like a manager watching a disturbance. He was looking at Frank like a man who had just recognized a name from a story. "Mr. Delaney," he said. Frank turned. "Yeah." The manager swallowed. "Frank Delaney? From Clearwater Local?" Frank nodded once. "Was. Retired now." The manager looked at me. "And you're Raymond Cole?" I held my coat tighter without meaning to. "That's right." His expression changed in a way I did not understand until he stepped closer and said, "My father was Luis Marquez." The name took a second. Then it came back with the smell of diesel and wet concrete. Luis Marquez, 19 years old, too skinny for the work, always writing numbers on his glove because he was taking night classes and studying during breaks. He had been one of the smartest helpers I ever had, and one of the poorest. "Luis," I said. "He worked the North County water job." The manager's eyes brightened. "He did?" "Good kid." "He said you were the reason he stayed alive long enough to become anything else." I did not know what to say to that. There are sentences a man has no defense against. The manager looked around the table, then back at me. "He told me when he was 19 a pipe section slipped during a lift. Everyone blamed him because he was new. You stopped the crew from turning on him. You made them check the rigging. The clamp had failed." I remembered that too, though I had not thought of it in years. Luis, standing white-faced beside a piece of pipe heavy enough to crush a truck cab, the company man ready to fire him because blaming a poor kid was cheaper than admitting bad equipment. "It was the clamp," I said. "Anyone could see it." "But not everyone would say it," the manager answered. "My father did not forget." He turned slightly and motioned toward the back hallway. On the wall near the entrance to the private dining room hung several framed photographs I had not noticed when we arrived. Old town pictures, restaurant pictures, a black and white shot of workers standing in front of an unfinished building. The manager walked over, lifted one frame gently from its hook, and brought it back. "This was before Maribel's was Maribel's," he said. "My parents bought this building after my father left field work. He kept this photo in the office for 27 years before we hung it out here." He angled the frame toward the table. A group of men in dirty work clothes stood shoulder to shoulder in front of steel beams and open brick. In the second row, younger, heavier through the shoulders, hard hat tucked under one arm, was me. Beside me stood Luis Marquez. On the other side, grinning like trouble, was Frank Delaney, with both hands still whole. The room leaned toward the photograph, as if proof at a gravitational pull. Patricia whispered, "Oh my God." Charles removed his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on, even though they were not dirty. Vivian looked at me as if I had changed shape in front of her. Elaine stared at the photograph with the fury of a person realizing the facts have stopped obeying her. Frank pointed at the frame. "That was the job after Tulsa." He looked at me. "You remember what you did when I came back?" I shook my head slowly. There were too many years, too many jobs, too many men. "You put me on light duty for 3 weeks and told payroll I was training new hires so they wouldn't cut my hours." He lifted his scarred hand. "My wife was due any day. I had no savings.
You knew that.
I never asked you. You just knew. One of the men from Table 6 stood then. He was smaller than Frank, with a cane and white eyebrows that nearly hid his eyes. "He did the same for me when my boy got sick," the man said. His voice trembled, but he kept going. "I was missing shifts driving back and forth to the children's hospital. Company wanted me gone. Ray changed the schedule.
Took 2 night inspections himself and told me to go sit with my kid." He looked at Megan. "Your father never told you that?" Megan shook her head, crying openly now. "No." Another man at Table 6 stood, then another. Chairs moved one by one, the sound spreading through the room like thunder held low. "He got me home alive from the refinery fire," one said. "He paid my motel bill after my divorce," said another. "He taught me to read blueprints after hours because I was too embarrassed to admit I couldn't," said a third. "He took the blame when younger men would have been fired. He drove 4 hours to tell a widow himself because he said bad news should never come from a stranger." Each line was short. None of them sounded rehearsed. That was why they hurt. They were not trying to make me into a saint. They were simply returning pieces of my life that I had left scattered behind me without expecting anyone to pick them up. The room that had laughed around me, pitied me, mistaken me for service, and watched me reach for my coat, now sat under the weight of witnesses. I wanted to stop them, not because they were wrong, but because praise has always made me feel like a man standing in borrowed clothes. I raised one hand. "That's enough." Frank looked at me. "No, Ray, it isn't." His voice lowered. "You spent your whole life making sure other men got to walk back into their houses. Tonight you were about to walk out of your own daughter's dinner like you didn't belong there. That is not enough." Megan made a sound then, small and broken. "Dad." I turned toward her. She had stood without seeming to realize it. Her napkin had fallen to the floor. Her eyes were red, her face stripped of all the careful makeup Elaine had warned me not to disturb. "Dad, I didn't know." I wanted to tell her it was all right. The words were there, out of habit, ready and waiting. It was all right when she forgot to call. It was all right when Elaine spoke over me. It was all right when they seated me at the edge. It was all right when she looked down. Fathers say those words too often because they would rather swallow glass than make their children bleed with guilt. But this time, with my coat still over my arm and every table listening, I could not give her a lie just because it would be easier to hold. "I know," I said, "but you didn't ask either." Her face crumpled. Elaine snapped, "Raymond!" The manager's eyes moved to her. Frank's did too. For once Elaine's voice did not control the room. She felt it immediately. "This has gone far enough," she said, standing now. "I will not have my family turned into some public spectacle by strangers who don't understand what we have been dealing with." Frank's mouth tightened. "Lady, I understand a man being humiliated when he's done nothing to deserve it." Elaine pointed toward me, but her hand shook. "You saw 10 minutes. I have lived with him for 40 years. 38, I said quietly. She turned on me. "What?" "We've been married 38 years. That small correction seemed to enrage her more than an accusation would have. "Fine. 38 years of martyrdom. 38 years of you coming home tired and silent and making me feel guilty for wanting more than dirt under my roof." There it was. Not the polished version, not the social version, the root. The room heard it. Megan heard it. I heard it too, though some part of me had known for a long time. Elaine was crying now, but not softly. Angry tears, embarrassed tears. "Do you know what it was like?" she demanded. "Going to school events alone because you were working? Sitting with other mothers whose husbands wore suits while mine came in smelling like oil?" Explaining why we couldn't take vacations because there was always another bill, another job, another crew that needed you more than your own family. I absorbed each sentence because some of it was true. That is the cruelest kind of attack, the kind built around a splinter of truth and sharpened into a knife. I had missed things. Too many. I had chosen overtime when I thought overtime meant love, in a form the bank would accept. I had come home tired. I had been silent. But silence is not absence, and labor is not shame. "You're right," I said. The room shifted again. Elaine blinked. She had expected defense. "I missed things," I continued. "I missed school nights and dinners and mornings I wanted back before they were even gone. I thought keeping the lights on was the same as being there. Sometimes I was wrong." Megan pressed both hands against her mouth. "But Elaine," I said, and my voice did not rise, "you did not tell me tonight that I failed you. You told me to get out because you were ashamed for these people to see me." Elaine's lips parted, but nothing came. "Those are not the same wound." Frank lowered his head slightly, as if the sentence had settled something in him. The manager stood beside the photograph, still holding it with both hands. Around the room, people looked at Elaine with a discomfort no manners could smooth away. Preston stood then. He had been quiet too long, and he knew it. His chair slid back. "Mr. Cole," he said, voice unsteady, "I'm sorry." I looked at him. He was pale, his perfect suit suddenly making him look younger, not richer. "For what?" I asked. "For not saying anything." His eyes moved to Megan, then back to me. "For letting this happen at my table." Charles Whitmore cleared his throat. For a moment, I thought he would rescue his son from humility. Instead, he removed his glasses again and said, "Raymond, I owe you an apology as well." Patricia looked at him in surprise. Charles seemed to struggle with the words, as if they were tools he had rarely used. "I judged you by surfaces. That was small of me." Vivian whispered, "Me too." Elaine sat down slowly, as if the bones had gone out of her anger. The apologies came awkwardly, not beautifully, and maybe that made them more honest. But I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. A man can dream of being recognized and still ache when recognition arrives too late to spare him the wound. Frank seemed to understand. He stepped closer and placed one hand on my shoulder. His grip was lighter than it once would have been, but I felt the old strength in it. "You don't have to stay," he said. That nearly undid me. Not the praise, not the photo, not the men standing. That sentence. "You don't have to stay." After a whole evening of being told where to sit, what not to say, how not to exist, Frank gave me back the one thing dignity always requires: choice. I looked at Megan. She was still standing, tears on her face, waiting like a child at the edge of a road she was afraid to cross. I looked at Elaine, who would not meet my eyes. I looked at my coat, wrinkled now from my own grip. "I came for my daughter," I said. My voice sounded older to me than it had at the beginning of the night. "That hasn't changed." Megan took one step toward me.
"Dad, please don't leave."
I did not answer right away. The whole room seemed to hold itself still again. But this silence was different from the first one. The first silence had waited for me to disappear. This one waited to see what I would choose. I walked out of the private room anyway. Not to leave, not yet. I just needed air that did not belong to anyone's judgment. The hallway outside the dining area was narrow and dim, lined with framed photographs and a small table holding mints in a glass bowl. I stopped near the coat stand and rested one hand against the wall. My knees felt less steady than I wanted to admit. Behind me, the noise of the room returned in low murmurs, cautious and changed. I heard Megan before I saw her. "Dad?" I closed my eyes for 1 second. Then I turned. She stood at the end of the hallway, no longer smoothing her dress, no longer checking whether anyone approved of her grief. She looked like my daughter again. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came out too fast, like they had been trapped behind her teeth all night. "I am so sorry." I looked at her, really looked. Under the makeup, under the ring, under the woman trying to step into a life with polished edges, I still saw the girl who had once fallen asleep on my chest while cartoons played too loud in the living room. "For what?" I asked. Her face twisted. "For looking away." I nodded slowly. That was the answer I needed. Not for Mom, not for the dinner, not for the misunderstanding. For looking away. She understood the wound. "Why did you?" I asked. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, ruining whatever was left of Elaine's perfect evening. "Because I was scared." "Of me?" "No." She shook her head hard. "Never of you. I was scared of her, of ruining the night. Of Preston's family thinking we were messy. Of everything falling apart." She gave a broken laugh. "And then it fell apart anyway." I leaned against the wall. Things built on pretending usually do. She looked down. "I should have said something when Mom moved your seat." "Yes." She flinched, but I would not soften that one, not completely. "I should have said something when Aunt Vivian thought you worked here." "Yes." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I should have let you give the toast." I looked toward the private room where Frank's voice rumbled low among the others. "Yes." Megan wrapped her arms around herself. "Do you hate me?" The question hit me harder than Elaine's insult. "No, sweetheart." Her face collapsed with relief and grief at the same time. "But I'm hurt," I said. "Those can both be true." She nodded, crying silently now. "I didn't know all those things about you." "You knew enough." She looked up. "What do you mean?" "You knew I showed up when I could. You knew I loved you. You knew I wasn't trying to embarrass you." Her mouth trembled. "I did." "Then the rest should not have been required before you stood beside me." She covered her eyes. I let the words sit. Fathers want to protect their children from pain, but sometimes pain is the only honest teacher left in the room. After a moment, Megan stepped closer. "When I was little," she said, "I thought you were gone because work took you from us." I nodded. Sometimes it did. "Mom made it sound like you chose everyone else." "Sometimes I probably made it easy for her to say that." "But you were trying to take care of us." "Yes." "And I let her make me ashamed of the way you did it." I said nothing. She reached for my hand, then hesitated like she no longer had the right. I opened my fingers. She took it. Her hand was soft and cold. Mine was rough and warm. For years I had worried those differences embarrassed her. Now she held on like they were proof of something she needed. "Please come back in," she said. "Not because Mom deserves it. Not because everyone apologized. Because I want you beside me." I looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes." "Even in this jacket?" She laughed through tears. "Especially in that jacket." I felt something in my chest loosen. Not heal, not yet, but loosen enough to breathe around. "All right," I said, "but I'm not sitting at the edge." Her grip tightened. "No." She wiped her face, lifted her chin, and for the first time that night, my daughter led me back into the room. When we returned, conversation died again, but this time Megan did not shrink from it. She walked straight to the family table, picked up my place card from the far curve, and moved it beside her own. Then she took the chair that had been angled away and pulled it close to hers. The legs scraped loudly across the floor. No one corrected her. No one told her it was awkward. No one mentioned the seating arrangement. Elaine watched with red eyes and a face so stiff it looked painful. Megan turned to Preston. "Dad sits here." Preston nodded immediately. "Of course." Then she looked at his parents. Patricia lowered her gaze. Charles said, "Yes, he should." Megan took my coat from my arm. For a second I thought she was going to hand it off to a waiter, and some old reflex in me braced. Instead, she folded it carefully, the way Elaine had not, and draped it over the back of the chair beside hers. The worn cuff faced outward. She did not hide it. That small gesture did what all the apologies had not. It told the room I was not being tolerated. I was being claimed. Frank saw it from table 6 and nodded once. The other old men sat slowly, their work done. The manager returned the photograph to its place on the wall, but left it slightly straighter than before, as if that too mattered. I sat beside Megan, not at the edge, beside her. For a while nobody knew what to do with themselves. That is the problem after truth enters a room. People cannot immediately go back to discussing dessert. They have to sit in the changed air and decide who they are going to be now that pretending has failed. Megan picked up her glass, then put it down again. "Dad," she said, loud enough for the table and the nearest guests to hear, "will you say what you wanted to say earlier?" Elaine closed her eyes. Preston looked at me with quiet encouragement. The room waited. I stood, slower this time, not because I was being pushed out, but because I had been invited to rise. My hands rested on the back of the chair. I looked at Megan first, then Preston. "I did have something prepared," I said. A few people laughed, softly, nervously. "Not on paper. I'm not much for speeches." I looked down at my watch, the cracked leather band Megan had once bought me with 16-year-old pride. When Megan was born, I was working a job 2 counties away. Storm came in hard that night. I drove slower than I ever drove in my life because I was afraid if I rushed, I wouldn't get there at all. When I finally held her, she wrapped her whole hand around one of my fingers. Megan pressed her lips together. I remember thinking no man should ever make a promise to a child unless he understands that promise will cost him something. The room was completely still. I did not keep every promise perfectly. I missed things I should have made. I worked when I should have been home. I was quiet when maybe I should have explained. but I loved my daughter every day. On job sites, in motel rooms, in trucks before sunrise, in kitchens after midnight. I loved her in every town that took me away from her, and in every mile that brought me back. Megan was crying again, but she did not look away. I turned to Preston. Marriage is not the polished version people see at dinner. It is what you do when nobody is impressed. It is whether you protect each other when protection costs you comfort. It is whether you tell the truth before silence turns into resentment. So love her in the small rooms, son, not just the bright ones. Preston nodded, eyes wet. I will. I looked back at Megan. And sweetheart, do not build a life where the people you love have to become smaller to fit inside it. Her hand found mine. I won't. I lifted my glass. To Megan and Preston, may your home have enough truth in it that no one has to earn their seat at the table. This time, when the room clapped, it did not sound like manners. It sounded like people trying, too late but honestly, to answer what they had failed to answer before. I did not stay long after that. Long enough to finish the toast. Long enough for Megan to sit beside me with her hand around mine under the table. Long enough for Preston to ask Frank and the men from Table 6 to join us for coffee, which they did, awkwardly at first, then warmly as old stories began moving through the room like air returning after a storm. Long enough for Vivian to come to me with both hands clasped and say, "Mr. Cole, I am sorry for what I assumed." And for me to tell her, people see what they're used to seeing. Which was forgiveness, but not absolution. Long enough for Charles Whitmore to ask me about pipeline work and actually listen to the answer. Long enough for Patricia to tell Megan, quietly but within my hearing, never be embarrassed by a father who loved you like that. Elaine did not apologize that night. Not really. She said, "I did not mean for it to happen that way," which is what people say when they are sorry for consequences but not yet ready to face the cruelty that caused them. I did not chase her for more. Some debts cannot be collected in public. Some reckonings wait until the house is quiet. When I finally stood to leave, Megan stood too. "I'll walk you out," she said. Elaine looked like she might object, then thought better of it. Frank rose from Table 6 as I passed. We looked at each other for a long moment. "Frankie," I said. He grinned. "Ray." I held out my hand. He ignored it and hugged me, not gently either. For a second, the years between the river crossing and that restaurant folded in on themselves, and I could smell rain and mud and coffee from a dented thermos. "You should have told people," he said near my ear. "Told them what?" "Who you were." I pulled back. "I was busy being it." Frank shook his head, smiling sadly. "That sounds like you." The manager came over before I reached the door. "Mr. Cole," he said, "your dinner is on the house." I started to refuse. He lifted a hand. "Please, for my father." That stopped me. I nodded. "Luis was a good man." "He became one," the manager said. "He said men like you showed him how." I had no answer for that either. So I gave him the only thing I could. "Thank you." Megan walked me through the front of the restaurant and out into the cool night. The valet stand was empty. The street lights shone on the windshield of Elaine's car. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Megan slipped her arm through mine like she had when she was small and wanted help crossing a parking lot.
I forgot about the rocks, she said. I looked at her. They're still in the garage. All of them? Far as I know. She laughed softly. Can I come see them sometime? They're rocks, Megan. No, she said, leaning her head briefly against my shoulder. They're where you were when you were loving me. I looked away then, because some tears deserve privacy even from the people who caused them. You can come see them. She nodded. And Dad? Yeah? I'm proud of you. The words were simple. Too simple for what they repaired, and too late for what they could not. But they reached a place in me that had been waiting longer than I knew. I touched the old watch on my wrist. The leather was cracked, the face was scratched. It still kept time. I'm proud of you too, I said. She looked surprised. After tonight? Especially after tonight. Why? Because you came back for the truth. She cried again then, but this time she did not hide her face. I kissed the top of her head, the way I had not done in years, and for a moment the polished restaurant, the white tablecloths, the cruel quote, the coat sliding toward me, all of it became smaller than my daughter's hand holding my arm. I drove myself home in my old truck. Elaine stayed behind with the car, or maybe with the wreckage of the version of herself she had tried to display. I did not know what would happen between us after that night. I still do not believe every wound needs to be solved before the story can tell the truth. Some marriages end long before anyone moves out. Some apologies arrive years late. Some never arrive at all. But I know this. When I walked into that restaurant, I believed the worst thing that could happen would be embarrassing my daughter. By the time I left, I understood the greater danger had been teaching her that love should sit quietly at the edge of the table, so pride could have the better seat. Frank Delaney did not save me that night because I needed a rescue. He stood because dignity sometimes needs a witness. The manager did not change the room because of money or status. He changed it because memory has a way of surviving in people you once helped without keeping score. And Megan did not heal everything by moving my chair, but she moved it. That mattered. A chair is a small thing until someone uses it to tell you where you belong. A coat is just a coat until someone slides it toward you like a dismissal. A table number is just a number until table 6 stands up and refuses to let a room mistake silence for shame. I still have the flannel jacket. Megan took it from me a month later and repaired the worn cuff herself, badly, but proudly, with thread a little too dark for the fabric. I wear it sometimes when she visits. She always notices. She always smiles. And every now and then she asks me for another story from the old jobs. Not because she cares about pipe or mud or overtime, but because she understands now that those stories were never about work. They were about the parts of her father that kept loving her where she could not see. That night, my wife told me, "Just get out," in front of everyone. For a moment, I almost did. Then an old foreman stood up from table 6, and the room finally learned what my daughter should have known all along. I was not a man who had no place at the table. I was the man who had spent his whole life building one.